Welcome to the podcast, Avril. I'm so grateful to have you on here. Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day this morning.
You are so welcome. I love talking with people. I love talking with like-minded people. So it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
I'd love if you could start by introducing yourself and your work as a transformational leadership mentor and what really inspired you to help people with reinventing themselves.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Avril. I'm a transformational leadership mentor, as Sarah said. And what really inspired me to do this was, I suppose, like so many of us, it was my own journey. It was my own journey of having to reinvent myself again and again and again, because that's what happens when we grow and evolve and change. We have to step into becoming somebody new all the time. And I really love seeing and supporting women in particular to do this, because I think from what I see and from what I've experienced myself, there are so many incredible women out there and mums who do not realize the power that they have inside of them from a very young age. They have squashed it down. They've been told it's not okay. They've been told to silence themselves and to change themselves and contort themselves. And as the years have gone on, they've got smaller and smaller and smaller, and they've fit into a box that is not theirs to fit into. And my role is to support them to step out of that box, to really transform their lives, to become who they're really here to be. I guess I liken it to if somebody is um, like a sculptor, I lost the word, a sculptor, and they have a big slab of clay, and they don't stick bits of clay together to create their creation at the end, like a Mr. Potato Head, seeing if it's the right nose and the right mouth and all that. They They get a big slab of clay and they chisel away at it. They chisel away until they come to the beauty and the power and the essence of what's inside that, of what was always there. And I feel like my role is like that. It's supporting women to really get rid of the masks and the muck and the stuff that they have taken on throughout their lives, so that they can get back to the essence of who they are and really reinvent themselves as this truth, rather than going through their lives feeling unfulfilled, feeling a bit lost, feeling like they're here for everybody else rather than for themselves and what really lights them up.
Oh, I love that analogy too. It's so relatable, and I feel I've done a lot of sculpting over the years, especially since becoming a mother, to actually still maintain but recreate who I am at the very core. And I think the way you speak about the force of the feminine in motherhood, I love that. And if you could just maybe explain this concept to our listeners and how that kind of ties in with the process of, becoming a mother.
Yeah, I think I noticed it first in myself when I became a mom, because like many of you, and definitely for me, I grew up doing the right thing. I was a good girl. I knew what the right thing to say and do was. And from a very young age, I squashed the fiery passion in me down, because it was too much. It was too much for other people. And so I learned how to behave, to be more feminine, to be, you know, who I should be in society. But I believe that the force is there in all of us. And for me, it started to really come out when I became a mum, because our child has different needs. And I knew from a very early stage that I was going to have to fight for him, that I was going to have to stand up against authority for him, that I was going to have to stand up, and his journey was going to be different. And I was going to have to be the pivotal leader in that journey. And but it meant really digging deep into myself to find that voice inside myself, the voice that was able to stand up, the voice that was able to even say to my husband, we have to do things differently. This is not how we have to raise him in a way that was different than how either of us were raised. And the force of the feminine is really, it's about bringing together, we're so masculine or feminine these days, but there's both. We're part, we're all part of both of those. And the force is about bringing together in a beautiful harmony the masculine and the feminine, because we do have a fire inside of us. It can, we can really tap into it when we allow ourselves to go there. And for me, being a mum was what ignited it. It was that thing about when to flow, which is the feminine, when we tap into the intuition and the flow and the beautiful ability to nurture and do all of those really motherly things. But actually, there also has to be a part of us that knows when to go, that knows when we need to take action, that knows when we need to change things, that knows when we need to stand up for our children or stand up in our businesses or stand up for ourselves. Because essentially, that's so much of what it comes down to, is standing up for ourselves and saying, I want something different. I need something different. And that force of the feminine is about really tapping into that. It's tapping into that fire and being able to find that harmony between when to flow and when to go.
Oh, yeah, I can totally relate to that one as well, because it's so easy, especially when things go unresolved, to fall into that kind of trap of thinking you're doing the best for everybody, and you're exerting all this energy, and actually when you look a little bit deeper, it's coming from that people pleasing and trying to fit into this mold of what's expected of you. And I think that's why self-care and things like self-regulation are so important, and it's a huge part of what I speak about, but I know it's also a ginormous part of your work, the nervous system regulation. And I'd love if you could share about how consistently practicing this has impacted you personally as a mother, and why it is so vital, especially in motherhood, and not only for us as parents, but also as early childhood teachers in that kind of space, working with children.
It's so important. And, you touched on something else there that's so important, is it's easy for us to become so self-sacrificing in
Mm,
motherhood or business, and to not realize that that's even what's happening, because that's what we saw role modeled and that's what we see in society. And because we don't fully believe in ourselves and know that we're enough on a real core level, we're constantly trying to prove ourselves, to be a good enough mom out there or to be a good enough leader of the family. And that just leads to us sacrificing ourselves for external validation, but also for our own validation, because we want to feel good enough inside ourselves. And it's like, how thin can I spread myself before I finally feel like I'm good enough? And the truth is, it doesn't matter. You can become as thin as a piece of cling film and you still won't, it's about that internal work. You still won't be good enough if you haven't done the inner work to know your own worth. So that was just a little sidetrack, but I wanted to address it because it's so easy for us to get caught up in this self-sacrificing. And yes, the nervous system is just so important for us as moms. And for me, what I really recognized was it wasn't about doing one thing once a week and that would do, because, in the world that we live in today, it's quite a stressful, it's busy, it's stressful. There's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of chaos in our external world. And to do something once a week, it's brilliant. It's better than nothing. But often what I see is, like, an hour after you've done said, I'll just use a breath work here or meditation. An hour after that, life has happened, and all of a sudden you're back to where you started again.
yeah.
Whereas I'm really about, like, daily consistent practices that we implement, because that's where we start to see our resilience growing over time. And
Mm,
that's where, when we then start to implement the bigger practices, we can actually see the biggest difference. And that's where our capacity then grows, because we can push our edges. But if we start to do too much too soon, our nervous system actually shuts down. And it's like, no, you know, we can't add more stress to an already stressed nervous system. And this is where people can get really caught up in doing a big modality and wondering why it's not working, wondering why they crash a week later. And it's because they didn't have the foundations in place in order to be able to then layer the next layer on top. We have to get the foundations in place. And that's what the daily consistent practices to me make the biggest difference. Because, and again, you're practicing daily, your kids are losing the plot. It's only an hour since you did something. It might seem small and insignificant, but it's enough to have you much more level on an ongoing basis.
Would you be able to just speak into a few really basic tools that work for you and that you've implemented with your clients? And like as you said, just starting off small, but just so accessible and doable in short kind of spurts throughout the day. Could you speak into those tools? That would be really great.
Absolutely. So, the first thing that is so missed that I think everybody should be doing, whether they're focused on their nervous system or not, is focusing on your basic primitive instincts. So, your basic bodily instincts of thirst, hunger, need for rest, need for the toilet. Please, women, go to the toilet when you feel the need coming on. If your
Yes.
child is burning a hand in a stove, then that's okay. Sort the stove out. That is a little bit urgent. But most of the time, we will hold on. I know women who've given themselves bladder infections from holding on, holding on, and holding on so much that they don't go to the toilet when they really need to. We don't need to do that. If you imagine you're being chased by a tiger, you're not going to think your body's going to shut down those basic systems in because it needs to survive the tiger. You're not going to be being chased by a tiger thinking, oh, where's the nearest toilet so I can just go have a wee. So it's if we don't listen to those basic impulses, we're basically telling our body that there's something more important. There's something more, more survival based that we need to do than feed ourselves, then go to the toilet, then rest, then have some water, and we're just conveying an internal sense that it's not safe. It's not safe to do these things. So, of course, that we're telling our nervous system it's not safe to do these. And it seems so simple. All you're doing is not going to the toilet, and you never once think of the flow on impact that it's having in your body. So, my first thing is always start with your basic impulses. Tune in. When you do this, you're also tuning into your body. What is the messages your body is giving you? Most people go through their entire day without ever tuning into their body. They have no idea. They eat like mindlessly. They drink mindlessly if they drink at all. It's all just done very unconsciously. And tuning into your body for those basic instincts, which are actually louder than a lot of the more subtle signs our body will give us. Though, when we start to do that, we start to convey a sense of safety, and we also start to convey this thing of I'm tuning into my body. I'm here to listen to it. So that's the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do is set an alarm for about every 2 or 3 hours. And I know this is going to feel like it's really hard. And just in that 2 or 3 hours, tune in. Tune into your body. How is it feeling? What's going on for me? Am I feeling like I'm really heightened? Am I feeling jittery? Am I feeling like I'm, maybe fight or freeze. But I mean, I know you do, Sarah, but whoever's listening, maybe you know that, but maybe you don't. And just starting to notice, am I feeling a bit anxious? Am I feeling panicky? Am I feeling really zen and calm? Am I noticing myself scrolling my phone endlessly without really having a purpose? So I'm just doom scrolling. Those are all signs that your nervous system is not in a really regulated place. So we have to first recognize what's going on in our body, and then we can do something about it. But I would start tuning in every couple of hours. I still set my alarm. Before we jumped on, I said I need to check that my alarm's off so that it doesn't go off on the podcast, because I still set my alarm, because guess what? I'm human. Life happens and life is busy. So I could go the whole day if I'm really busy without tuning in as well. But I really want to stay on top of this. It's important to me. I know how it plays out in life. So that would be the next thing, is tune into your basic instincts and actually set your alarm and tune into your body. and then actually start to bring in small practices. So an education around your nervous system is really important as well. So you can identify just a basic education just around what is fight, what is flight, what is freeze, and what do they feel like in my body. So what, because different people have different responses. So what do they actually feel like in my body? Because then when you know what they feel like, you can apply a tool. Because I can tell you a breathing technique here that might be amazing for if you're in fight or flight, so a real calming one. But if you're in freeze, that same breath work is only going to help you, sort of, is only going to numb you or slow you down even more. You need a slightly more activating breath work then to just give
Right.
you a little bit of energy. So getting to know ourselves is so essential. And things that are amazing, regardless of what state you're in, are things like self-containment hugs. You put one arm under your arm, or one hand under your arm, one hand on your shoulder. That can give a beautiful sense of safety. Or even like this, it's like a giant hug that many of us didn't get as kids. Um, Things like rubbing your hands up and down your arms can be a really beautiful one as well, because it brings a sense of touch and gives us an idea of the outside of our body. Because again, often when we're dysregulated, we don't know where our body ends and the environment begins. We lose a sense of that. We just become so frazzled. It's like the frazzlement is everywhere. And we just bring that back to ourselves. And it's really, really soothing as well. And you can do that down your face. You can do it in your thighs. If you're like in a meeting, a business meeting, or you're on a Zoom call or something, just doing it on your, nobody can notice. You're just rubbing your hands up and down your thighs, and it just brings a real sense of calm, regardless of what sort of state you're in.
Those are some
I could go
really, really useful.
on and on, but I don't want to. Yeah, I'm conscious.
No, you've just laid a really, really solid foundation. And I think if our listeners put just those basic things into practice, they are going to notice a ginormous transformation if none of that has been covered so far. I think something else that you touched on with connecting into that moment during when your alarm goes off. Like I actually have the same where I've got an app that just pops up and it says breathe, and so that's my signal to breathe right into my heart space, to feel into my body, to know what is going on internally. And again, having that knowledge of the nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the stress responses. um no, so that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I think leading on to that, we could speak about how working with children, or just motherhood in general, having those interactions can really bring up some strong emotions. So when you feel triggered, what would you suggest in terms of tools to ground yourself and then approach those challenging moments more mindfully, more consciously?
So this is so interesting because, and this is where knowing our own children is really important, because when often they still have very big emotions. So ideally, in an ideal situation, when you feel triggered, it's brilliant to be able to complete the stress response. So if you are feeling really activated and you're feeling angry, to be able to release that anger in whatever, like in a, screaming into a pillow and punching a pillow, and whatever way that that stress response needs to be released from your body. But obviously when we've got children around, it's not always that simple, because we don't want to scare them with
Yeah,
really big emotions.
yeah,
I mean, it's fine for them to see us crying and stuff like that, but if you've got a sensitive child and you go, punching a pillow, that might really scare them to see mom quite so angry. And so it can be really good for them to be able to use different tools and tactics then. So sometimes we'll have to park the bigness of our emotion and come back to the big release later. But what I can find really helpful in times like that is getting outside can be really good. Getting outside to ground my feet on the grass, bringing my child with me if he's really struggling with big emotions, It can also be, I find like tapping, just tapping here is really, really helpful for me because, again, it gets me really into my body and grounds me in this place. An ice cube can be fabulous. So, holding an ice cube where you just, because again, it gets you back to the present moment. It gets you out of the big emotion and into the present moment and into a deep connection with your body. Um, Things like splashing water on your face can be fabulous. I also, depending on what, the situation of being triggered or whatever, I will often talk it through if my child is there. I'm feeling XYZ. I need a bit of space to be able to breathe through this. I need a bit of space to just allow this to come up. I you know It's a tricky because often our children will then follow us. They don't understand quite what space means, and because when they feel us feeling something big, they they want to be even closer to us, so they don't always give us that space. But yeah, going into a different room just to breathe, to take those three big deep breaths that can allow us to just come back to our body, not be taken over, because essentially when we're triggered, we're taken over by the bigness of the emotion, and just allow ourselves to come back to the present moment, back to connection with what is. Again, something like this can really help because it gets us into our body again, rather than running away with a story in our mind. And just like anything that supports you to ground. And this is where getting to know yourself, pushing a wall can be really good if you're feeling real like you've got a lot of big energy that needs to come out. Pushing a wall can be good. Play is epic.
Yes.
Especially if our kids are feeling big emotions, bringing in like pillow fights, bringing in, walking around the house as if we're stomping or pretending we're an animal. That sort of thing can be really, really
Mm.
powerful to do with our kids. And it's releasing those big emotions. It's also grounding us in our body, and it's supporting us to regulate at the time as well.
Those are some really good ones. And I am such an advocate for play as well, because that's something that's very often missed. And this is, I bring it up all the time that when you're learning something new, not only as a child, but as an adult, through conventional means, it can take up to 400 repetitions of the same thing to create that wire in the brain. Whereas research has shown and studies that through play, it's 10 repetitions, and then that brain, that
Mm.
wire in your brain, the synapses is fired and you've created a new pathway. And it's like, how is this not common knowledge? Like, yeah. So doing the I find when I'm really triggered, like if I'm trying to get my child into the car and he just does not want to get in there, and we're, of course, running late or for whatever the reason is, and I'm feeling really riled up, I'm like, okay, what kind of animal can we be to get into the car, and what kind of noises can we make? Because it's like movement, sound, breath. So you're bringing in all of these other nervous system regulating tools, but in such a fun and playful way. And when you're playing, like, it's such a quick shift in energy too, I find. So you mentioned in what you were just saying there about how when we're triggered, these stories can start coming up in our mind. And I think many of us really inherit limiting beliefs that we're unaware of subconsciously from childhood, which can then shape how we view ourselves and what we believe is possible as well in that moment or just in general. So, what it would be your, I guess, go to method when it comes to reframing these beliefs, and especially given that both of the brain and the nervous system can perceive change as a threat. So changing those autopilot stories that do crop up.
Such a great question. And this is such a fundamental part of being triggered as well, because we're very rarely, we're triggered by our child not getting in the car seat, but that's not what's really going on. We're triggered because we don't want to be judged by showing up at our play group late by other parents. And it's not about, it's that way down the line because we think that we're not good enough because we then show up late. And that is flowing on to get in the seat, and then pushing your child in the car seat or whatever it is. So, and it's those underlying beliefs that are what actually triggers us. So going back to the previous question, it's so important once we're regulated to actually do that self-reflection and like introspection, is to actually, why did that trigger me? What was it about my child's big emotions that triggered me? What was it about that experience that brought that up for me? And start to really get to know ourselves again, because we're only triggered by something something deeper that's going on. Again, the problem that seems like the problem is never the problem. So we need to actually do that exploring, but it's not, that time is not right. When you're trying to regulate and when your child is there, that's not the right time to grab your journal and start delving into what the heck is going on underneath. We have to actually go and explore that at another time. And this is where your beliefs come in, because yes, we do take on beliefs predominantly between when we're 0 and 7, but also, up to 12. And actually, our brain continues to keep growing right throughout life. So, because it's called neuroplasticity. So please do not panic if your children are past 7 and you're thinking, oh no, I've instilled all these things in my child. It's okay. Because that can be a source of mum guilt as well. But we go down that rabbit hole and think, oh no, they're doomed because I didn't know this stuff when they were younger. We can change our beliefs at any stage, and your child can, and you can as well. And what it really comes down to is we have to identify first of all, we have to identify what the belief is, because when we took it on board, there was a situation that happened, and we created meaning out of the situation. And the meaning that we made out of it became our belief. So we decided we weren't good enough because, I don't know, our mum didn't look at a painting that we'd drawn right away when she was busy getting dinner, and it was so big for us, and she didn't look at it at that moment, and we decided we weren't valuable enough, or we weren't enough for her to look at it. And and that's not minimizing it. That's actually, that belief really became very strong in our mind. But what our brain does is, when we have a belief in our mind, it then scans our environment because it believes it's true. So it scans our environment for evidence to prove that. So if we have a belief that I'm not enough, or that I don't have any value, our brain from that age on, so from say 4 years old on, will be scanning the environment to prove that. So it will see all of the evidence for that. It will see the evidence when you're in school. It will see the evidence when you didn't get 100% in that test. It will see evidence in all of the different places, in the relationships that you attract, in the business that every single area. You become a mom. All of a sudden, you're not enough because the kids didn't eat the dinner that you made. And you wonder why it feels so big at that age, because it was so big when you were 4. And so what we need to do is we have to first recognize what the belief is, and recognize that it's not true. It really is not true. It's so deeply ingrained, and you've got so much evidence stacked against, or like stacked for it now, that of course it feels true. But if it doesn't feel good for you, and deep in your heart it's not the essence of who you are, it's not true. Whether it feels true or not, there's a relative truth, and there's like absolute truth. And it is relative truth because it's relative to you, but it's not absolute truth. So you have this belief, you recognize it. Now you need to do something about it. So, I mean, it's quite simple. We need to look at some inner child work to release any emotions around it. There might be some trauma work needed to release emotions around it. And then we need to actually choose a new belief. Now, it sounds so simple. I just need to choose a new belief, and I'm going to keep saying affirmations to myself. Doesn't work like that. You can do affirmations till you're blue in the face, but you actually have to find evidence for it in your daily life and create evidence for it. So if you believe you're not enough, a more helpful belief, or a way to reframe it, is actually, I am enough. I'm such a valuable person just as I am. Now your job is to go and find evidence for that. So looking around your environment, looking for past evidence for it, but also present evidence for it that actually proves that you are enough. Look, I got dinner on the table tonight. I'm amazing. I held it together when my kids were losing the plot. Amazing. So instead of pushing those things aside and saying, it wasn't that good, oh, any mum would do that, we have to start writing a big column of evidence that reinforces the new belief. And that is the way that we weaken the old one and start strengthening the new one. And also, when we notice ourselves going into a pattern of the old belief comes up, I'm not enough. We actually have to see it, and but not go into a story about it. Okay, I recognize you coming up again. You're not true. I'm not. I'm
Mm.
going over here instead. So we have to constantly be refocusing and reframing, because sometimes it's very easy for us to be like, you're just a nice familiar belief. I think I'll go down that rabbit hole and write a whole story about you. And that all that does is it reinforces the nonsense, the lie, instead of being like, okay, I recognize you for what you are. I don't want you in my sphere anymore. And I'm going to entertain a real truth instead of a lie.
Oh, you just popped out for a second there, Avril. Sorry.
Do you so what bit did you get? What bit did you miss?
just that just that last little tail end on when we're looking for the new evidence, and you said about we could create a whole story on it, and then you flipped out. I'm just thinking it could be because my
Okay.
battery is
And
slowly going. It's right, we got 32%.
yeah, it goes down really fast actually when you're doing recording and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, we can write a whole story on it, but all we're doing is writing a story about the lie. We need to actually we need to be disciplined with ourselves, recognize what we're doing, and actually say, I'm not going to entertain that anymore. I'm going to choose something new, because we know that what you've done so far has got you to where you are. If you want things to change moving forward, you have to start being disciplined about, what am I going to entertain? Because we grow and we thrive based on what we feed ourselves, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, cognitively, the people that we hang around with, the environments we hang around with. And if we want something different, we actually have to do something different. So it does take a bit of work, but it's so worth it, because these old beliefs, they're just keeping us really small and limited.
Those limiting beliefs, they are the path of least resistance. And as you say, our brain, our nervous system does not like change. So they are just going to keep going down those same pathways until it's up to us to really stop them in their tracks. And when we do, that's when real change can happen. So I think,
Mm.
yeah,
And
you've
you're right.
covered that really, really well.
Yeah, our nervous system loves to stay the same, not because it wants to keep us limited, but because what's familiar to the brain feels safe to the brain. So even if it's the most destructive environment we're in, or destructive mental headspace, if that's what feels familiar, then your brain is going to be like, okay, this is okay, this is safe here, I'm going to stay here. And your nervous system will be like, okay, even if your nervous system is dysregulated in the process. I was in a place of functional freeze for over 20 years, and yet for my nervous system that felt really safe. It felt harder for me to change and move out of that than it was to stay in that really destructive place, because that felt familiar. And so to move out of it for my nervous system was like, whoa, this isn't, yeah, this doesn't feel good at all. But ultimately, you can, yeah, again, it comes back to, you can stay the same forever, or you can edge closer to what it is that is really true for you.
So, for those working with young children, our early childhood teachers that are listening, wanting to make that change, especially during children's big behaviours, call it what it is, their tantrums, their meltdowns, their big emotions, co-regulation is essential. So, what's one key concept about co-regulation you think that our teachers and parents should understand, and the tools that you'd recommend that would go for those that are struggling with this?
So I think the most important thing that I would love to share about co-regulation is your nervous system is not separate from your children's, or the children that
Mm,
you're in connection with. That's what co-regulation is, but it actually means even if you're not actively choosing co-regulation, if you're dysregulated, then it's co-dysregulation. It's because we are in the other person's energy sphere and we do impact each other. So just like if you're in a class with 20 kids and they're all really hyper and dysregulated, then chances are your nervous system is going to feel a bit frazzled as well. And so this is why it comes back to us. It always comes back to, because we're the adult, we actually have the control over what's going on. Our kids are still learning, whether they're your kids or they're somebody else's, they're still learning, and they learn from us. So we have to sort ourselves out first, because if we don't, it's going to flow on to everybody else. And this can feel like a real sense of responsibility and can feel a bit overwhelming, because it's like, oh, it's all on me. But actually, it's really empowering. The same, it can feel like that, but actually, you actually have a choice. And if you do this, it will impact the children as well. So I think that's the most important thing, is the power that we have inside of ourselves to impact our children or the children that we're in connection with, if we are or aren't regulated or dysregulated. It simply doesn't matter. Regardless, we have that power to influence them. Now, do you want that power to be used in a really positive way to regulate them or to dysregulate them? And again, this comes back to your own nervous system. Sort your basics out, ground yourself. If you're struggling in the moment, remove yourself from their energy, because trying to solve the problem in the same environment that's creating it isn't supportive. We have to sometimes get out of that environment, if it's at all possible, again, to go outside, to just gain perspective. I love outside and nature, because when we're feeling dysregulated, we can feel very confined by the limitations of the four walls of our house or the four walls of the center that you're in. Whereas when you get outside, there's a bigger space for all that energy to go. There's the atmosphere it can go into. There's the ground you can actually push it into as well. There's so many places that that big energy can go, and that's where you need to come back to, what are the tools that support you. Do I, just like you said, taking some breaths, taking some really conscious connected breaths, so that you just ground yourself, you come back to your connection with yourself, to the present moment. Because when we're dysregulated, we're in la la land. We're just, gone. Where there's that fight is in there, or the freeze, whatever place we're in, but we're not actually present and connected. And then we can come back and actually connect with our kids again. So grounding, breath, touch for ourselves, again, touch on your face, a drink. Just pause and take a drink. Even that can be so powerful, of just getting us out of the and into, okay, I'm present and connected right now.
And by modeling that, that's where our children can absorb our calm. And as you say, we're so interconnected energetically that when they see us, even like, as you said, talking through our own emotions, that then encourages them, when they are feeling, if they're developmentally at that stage and they can understand that, then that encourages them to then start talking through their own emotions. And I know somewhere you mentioned about not necessarily labeling emotions. Could you speak a little bit into that
Mm,
for children? I found that really interesting.
yeah. And this can be very individual for your kids. But what I found really supportive is actually, because what we're wanting to, sometimes when we label, we go up into our head and we intellectualize it. What I found really supportive is actually going into the sensations in our body, because this gets us into our body. What's coming up in your body? So, oh, my heart is racing, my hands are sweaty, I can feel my mouth has gone really dry, I can feel like there's a lump in my throat. That allows us to be much more in tune and connected with our body than, I'm feeling anxious. Because guess what? Anxiety and excitement actually produce the same the same sensations in our body. It just depends on the label that we give them. And so I found this really, really supportive for myself, but also for my son, because allowing him to know that the same sensations, the same sensations coming up in his body can mean different things. So we want to first tune into what the sensations are in our body before we then decide the label we're going to give them. Because the label is like, that's just the story. But then we can go off into a story about, oh, I'm anxious because I'm doing a new, I'm taking up a new activity or whatever. When actually, maybe you're just excited. Maybe it's new. Maybe it feels exciting. Maybe it feels like an adventure. So I, like, for me and for the people I work with and for my son, definitely going into what are the physical sensations that are coming up. What is my nervous system actually it's like showing me now? What is it telling me right now? Rather than what does my brain think? Because that's what we'll do. We'll go into, my brain thinks I should be anxious because this is what we've labeled as anxiety. If you go onto Google and you say, what are the symptoms of anxiety? And you go through the list and you'll be like, okay, that ticks the anxiety box. But what's actually coming up for you? Because again, we want to be in our bodies when it comes to our nervous system, not our heads. Well, actually, when it comes to most things, we want to be more in our bodies because we've got very detached. We're like these walking heads now, where we just walk around knowing everything but changing nothing. Yeah, so that's why I think the power of actually tuning into our body, tuning into what's coming up for us, because then we can work with what's coming up for us on a physical level rather than, okay, how am I going to deal with this anxiety up here? Because we actually have to get into the body. That's how we support our nervous system, not up in our head.
I wonder if you're going in and out. My battery says I've got 13 minutes, but I don't want to miss the question.
Okay.
That was my last question for you, but I don't want to miss the question about how people can find you. Should we do that one,
Oh, yeah.
and then I can rejig it if
Yep.
we. Did you want to say any more on the co-regulation? It just chopped you off at the very end there.
I Yeah, I just think of the importance of being in our body, because that's one of the things that I see so often is people intellectualize healing. They intellectualize nervous system regulation, and they know everything they should do. There's so much information available now, and information does not equal transformation is my big thing. And especially when it comes to the nervous system, because knowing it all can actually be the biggest hindrance to actually doing the work. We change, we become better at regulating and co-regulating when we actually start to really embody the work, not when we know more. So as tempting as it is to learn more and more and more, do not do it without actually putting some basics in place, because putting the basics in
Yeah,
place is what will make the difference, not more and more information.
absolutely. Yes, yeah. It's definitely so much more important to get those basics sorted and to be able to sink into the body and the embodiment of the work rather than thinking that you know X, Y, and Z and then wanting to learn more. It's almost like this trap of just researching that actually keeps you in that fight or flight because you're not doing the practical tools. So when we go through, I've got a program, Calm and Connection, there'll be, sections of, yes, this is the basic information, but here is the practical tools. And now let's practice it together. Now let's do a body connection meditation. So you've got that somatics in actually embodying the work, because as you say, you can know all the things, but if you're not practicing, then it's really like useless information that's just taking up space and taking up your time and your energy. So it's really that vicious cycle. It can become that.
And it can block us from actually making any changes because we're so convinced that we know it. We know what we need to do, and yet our lives, and I know this from my own experience. I was the world's greatest researcher. I've been learning, I've been reading self-help books since I was 14. I went and studied psychology in my late 20s to understand myself more. Nothing changed until I had my child, because then he forced me to actually embody what I needed to do in order to change, because you can't get away from it. Children, relationships, business, they will bring all your stuff up. And the beautiful thing is, you can't run away from the embodiment. Well, you can, but if you want to change and grow, you can't run away from the embodiment piece, because it's the only piece that's going to really deeply embed you in the transformation long term. And yeah, it's so easy. And we, like I said earlier, we live in an information era now. There's so much information available. We can get it anywhere, and it's a very easy trap to get caught in of, I'm just learning more, I'm doing another program, I'm doing this course, I'm going to study another modality, but you're not actually embodying anything. Nothing changes unless we actually do the embodiment piece, until we tap in and we actually start to make the changes every single day, like internally and externally. And that's when we start to see the transformation.
Yeah, yeah. So, where can our listeners find you, and what resources do you offer for those ready to begin their or deepen their journey of transformation?
Cool. So I'm on Facebook at Avril Brown. Really simple. And I'm on Instagram at Avril1Brown. And that's where I'm available at the moment. And I have a free ebook on nervous system regulation for busy mums. Actually, it's for anybody, but it was specifically targeted earlier in my journey for busy mums. I have a free Facebook group called Mumpreneur Mastery, where we talk all things transformation, motherhood, business, and it's really looking at becoming a master of it all without sacrificing what matters most. So, I'm not into mums having an amazing business, or having an amazing business, being a perfect mom while you're then sacrificing yourself. No, it's about, how can I have what I want whilst whilst still honoring what matters most to me. And I also have a small group program that I'm about to start, which is called Reinvent Yourself, where we will have weekly calls and community and daily accountability and stuff like that. And obviously, you can work with me one-on-one as well. And if you're interested, just reach out to either on my Facebook through Messenger or through Instagram.
Awesome. I'll put those links so they can go straight to find you in our show notes. So if you're listening, check the little blurb and you'll be able to find all the information there on Avril. Oh, I so appreciate everything you've brought to the table today, Avril. I mean, we could sit here for hours, but disclaimer, I forgot my charger and my laptop's about to go flat. But you have, honestly, you've really just wrapped everything in a nice little bow of what the topics that we've gone through. So thank you so much again for making the time and being here.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me, Sarah.